Welcome to the Battle at Gettysburg. This is a quick synopsis of what happened and the toll it took on both sides.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to dive right into a complete synopsis of the most iconic, high-stakes clash ever fought on American soil. I'm talking, of course, about the Battle of Gettysburg. Over the course of 3 totally unpredictable and unimaginable days, the fate of a deeply fractured nation hung entirely in the balance. So, here's our chronological roadmap for today. We'll start with the road to Gettysburg, then move through the tactical shifts across all 3 days of fighting, starting with the fight for the high ground, moving to the defense of the flanks, and then Pickett's infamous charge. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the bloody aftermath. All right, Section 1, the road to Gettysburg. Before a single shot was even fired, we really have to understand the immense pressure both armies were under heading into that sweltering summer of 1863. Robert E. Lee was facing this really unique strategic dilemma. On one hand, his Confederate army was riding high off a massive victory at Chancellorsville, so they felt absolutely invincible. But the stark reality? The Confederacy was literally starving. Their food supplies had totally collapsed. They desperately needed to push north to loot supplies and secure a knockout victory to finally win British recognition. Meanwhile, the Union Army was under strength and dealing with a massive, last-minute leadership change, with George Meade taking command just days before the battle. But they had a massive advantage in motivation. They were fiercely defending their own home soil.
Now, here's a fascinating quirk that played a huge role in this battle. Lee's use of what's often called the Southern gentleman dialect. See, Lee absolutely hated issuing highly specific, step-by-step military orders. Instead, he relied on meaningful pauses, specific glances, and just this aristocratic bearing to convey what he wanted. His old commanders? They intuitively got it. But his newly appointed corps commanders, Richard Ewell and A.P. Hill, absolutely did not. And as we're going to see, these vague directives completely confuse them at the absolute worst possible moments.
Section 2, Day 1, the high ground. Let's fast forward to July 1st, 1863. This is where a random, chance encounter over rumored supplies in a tiny Pennsylvania crossroads town kicks off the whole conflict.
It is honestly incredible to see how fast a tiny skirmish spun completely out of control. In the morning, Confederate forces push forward looking for shoes and supplies, but they accidentally run into Union cavalry commander John Buford, who fights this brilliant delaying action. Fast forward to the afternoon, and Confederate generals Ewell and Hill arrive in massive force, completely routing the outmanned Union troops. By evening, those battered Union forces are forced to fall back through the town just to consolidate whatever strength they have left.
But here is the massive, crucial turning point. By retreating, the Union Army inadvertently stumbled into a defensive jackpot, the high ground on Cemetery and Culp's Hills. General Meade's army formed this formidable, fishhook-shaped defensive line on those ridges. This gave them interlocking fields of fire and interior lines, meaning they could rush reinforcements wherever they were needed in minutes. It basically forced Lee's men to painstakingly attack uphill for the remainder of the battle. Which brings us to a gigantic lost-in-translation moment. Remember that Southern gentleman dialect? Well, Lee ordered General Ewell to take Cemetery Hill if practicable. To Lee, that obviously meant, take that hill immediately. Don't worry, you won't be blamed if you fail. But Ewell, he looked at his exhausted men, looked at this steep hill with Union troops digging in, and famously decided an assault was simply not practicable. That one moment of fatal hesitation allowed the Union to fully secure those defenses, and it fundamentally dictated everything that happened next.
Section 3, Day 2, Defending the Flanks. The second day completely resets the stakes. Now, Lee is attempting to roll up the seemingly unsupported edges of the Union line.
Let's trace the sequential maneuvers that triggered just utter chaos across the battlefield on July 2nd. The Confederate plan was pretty straightforward, a coordinated strike on both Union flanks. But, things rarely go according to plan in war.
Especially when Union General Daniel Sickles decides to completely ruin Meade's perfect defensive deployment. Acting out of pure bitterness and totally insubordinately, Sickles just marched his 3rd Corps half a mile forward to a peach orchard without any orders whatsoever. This unauthorized move created a massively exposed salient, and Confederate General James Longstreet brutally exploited that blunder. It led to some of the most terrifying close-quarters combat of the war in places that quickly earned grim nicknames like the Slaughter Pen, the Wheat Field, and the Valley of Death.
Now, because of Sickles going rogue, a vital hill called Little Round Top was left completely undefended. It sparked a desperate scramble. The 20th Maine, led by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, was rushed in to hold the extreme left of the Union line. As the Confederates relentlessly attacked, Chamberlain literally had to bend his line 90 degrees just to avoid being flanked. And when they finally ran out of ammunition, against absolutely impossible odds, Chamberlain ordered a desperate swinging door bayonet charge. It was miraculous. It completely shattered the Confederate assault and saved the Union's wildly vulnerable left flank.
Section 4, Day 3, Pickett's Charge. We enter the third day, and a deeply frustrated Robert E. Lee decides to abandon the flanks entirely and strike a devastating blow right at the Union center.
But right before the main infantry assault could kick off, there was a massive cavalry clash behind the Union lines. Confederate cavalry commander J.E.B. Stuart had finally returned and was trying to swing around to strike the Union rear. But a young, fiery Union cavalry commander named George Custer injected incredible energy into the fight. Shouting, "Come on, you Wolverines!" Custer personally led a fierce countercharge that permanently shut down Stuart's dangerous flanking attempt. Okay, back to the main Confederate plan. At 1 p.m., they unleashed the single largest artillery barrage of the entire war. Over 150 guns bombarded Cemetery Ridge to soften up that Union center. But thanks to dense gun smoke and terrible visibility, they actually overshot most of their targets, and the Union gunners cleverly played possum. They slowly stopped firing one by one, tricking the rebels into thinking the Union cannons were knocked out. In reality, they were just saving their precious ammunition for the terrifying infantry assault they knew was right around the corner. And the result of that was the sheer devastating spectacle we now know as Pickett's Charge. 13,000 Confederate soldiers marched across wide-open fields. They were staggered by uneven ground and absolutely decimated by Union enfilade fire from all those cannons that were supposed to be knocked out. General Lewis Armistead famously managed to breach the Union stone wall, but fell just moments later. In the end, this audacious but totally doomed frontal assault resulted in an astounding 8,000 Confederate casualties. It effectively broke the back of Lee's mighty army.
Section 5, The Bloody Aftermath. With the guns finally falling silent on the evening of July 3rd, both of these armies were left to grapple with the unimaginable toll of those 3 days.
51,000. Let that sink in. That is the staggering estimated number of combined casualties. Men killed, wounded, captured, or missing. This grim statistic forever secures Gettysburg's place as the deadliest military engagement ever fought on American soil.
And breaking those numbers down a bit further tells quite a story. While General Meade suffered heavily, losing about a fourth of his army, Lee lost between 23,000 and 28,000 men. That was over a third of his entire fighting force. This catastrophic loss of manpower completely shattered the Confederacy's offensive capabilities for the rest of the war. They would never, ever invade the North again. Following the battle, Lee managed this desperate escape back to Virginia under the cover of a massive rainstorm. Meade cautiously pursued him, but he was still pretty haunted by past Union disasters like Fredericksburg, so he avoided launching a reckless attack against Lee's fortified escape route. Now, President Lincoln was deeply frustrated by this. He wanted the war ended right then and there. But despite Lee slipping away, this decisive Union victory fundamentally flipped the strategic momentum of the war. And crucially, it permanently dashed any hopes of the South getting European recognition.
Of course, the legacy of this battle goes way, way beyond military tactics. Just a few months later, standing on that very same blood-soaked ground, President Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. He powerfully called for a new birth of freedom. In just a few minutes, Lincoln's profoundly historic words shifted the nation's focus away from tactical maneuvers and firmly back to the overarching moral purpose of the entire war, preserving liberty, equality, and the Union itself.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you all with a thought-provoking question. What if just one miscommunication on day one had gone differently? If Lee wasn't so vague with his Southern gentleman orders, or if Ewell hadn't hesitated at Cemetery Hill, would the course of American history have been permanently altered? It's kind of wild to think about how the razor-thin margins of this horrific three-day battle shaped the very nation we live in today. Keep asking those what-if questions, and keep exploring the incredible intricacies of our history. Thanks so much for learning with me today.